For more on this development, we are now joined from our Pretoria studios by analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Was this expected?
I don't think it was expected like this. I think what was expected is for Dr. Dlamini-Zuma to be incorporated or included in a new cabinet. And there was obviously some signs in the past that the Minister of Higher Education and Training, Dlamini-Zuma, that at some point he will become a target of this type of reshuffling. So in that sense, yes, there was the expectation that at some point before December, a cabinet reshuffle is most likely. But I think what surprised all of us is that Dr. Dlamini-Zuma is not included in this latest cabinet reshuffle, though the leader of the Communist Party, the General Secretary Dlamini-Zuma, has been now removed from cabinet.
Prof, 11 cabinet reshuffles President Jacob Zuma has affected in his tenure. This is compared to 5 in his first term between 2009 and 2014. What do you make of this chop and change?
Well, it's indicative of the fact that President Zuma is changing his leadership not only in government but also the directors general, persons in key positions, for example, in the criminal justice system. Many of the key persons are also in acting positions. So it looks like he does not want to have a stable cabinet and leadership government. If one compares it, for example, with President Mbeki, he never made any cabinet reshuffles except after the election of 2004. And in that sense, it is the two extremes that we are seeing. On the one hand, President Zuma, who very frequently changes his cabinet and did it every year during his 7-year term now already, or 8-year term, except last year. But otherwise, that is very much indicative of the style that President Zuma have adopted since the beginning in 2009.
Prof, we've seen a lot of reaction from the opposition and a number of analysts who've come out and basically stated or raised the fact that the energy minister, former state security minister, who is now the Minister of Energy, David Mahlobo's appointment is basically placing him in a space where he's meant to play President Zuma's gallery of the nuclear plans. This has come out in reaction to the cabinet reshuffle that happened very early this morning. What's your view on this redeployment of David Mahlobo?
Well, I would say first of all that the Minister David Mahlobo, while he was even Minister of State Security, Intelligence therefore, have been used by President Zuma in all sorts of capacities. He have been most of the time accompanied him on his state visits outside the country. For example, when there were the student marches to Parliament, or even in other contexts of where the students were involved, he was always present there. We also know that, for example, he was present in March when President Zuma that evening, Friday evening, changed his cabinet, the cabinet reshuffle. He was next to President Zuma there. So it's not only that he acted in his capacity as Minister of State Security, but it's clear that he is one of the real confidants of President Zuma. And therefore, it does not really matter in which portfolio he is, whether it is state security or energy. He's being used by President Zuma in all sorts of capacities. So I think one should be careful to overinterpret the fact that he is now allocated to energy. I think one of the factors that is inhibitive of him simply going ahead and starting to implement or concluding agreements on the nuclear deal is first of all that in April this year there was a very important Western Cape High Court judgment which to a large extent set aside all the agreements that have been made with respect to the nuclear deal. So it took them back to square one. And I don't think the Department of Energy has done much in order to prepare for the next nuclear deal, to take that forward again. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. I think secondly what we are seeing is now today it was announced that the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises in Parliament is starting with their investigation on state capture in general, but specifically on Eskom. And I think what is necessary from President Zuma's side is to have quite a strong, well-established minister who can, in a sense, take responsibility to try to protect the ESCOM during this period. So I think there's other considerations over and above the nuclear one which plays a role. And I think we should not be so fixated on the nuclear deal that we don't see the other factors also in the bigger picture.
Is the latest reshuffle in any way likely to influence the ANC's December elective conference?
I don't think directly. I think what we are seeing is that the factional divides, the divisions within the ANC have been deepened with this, especially with relation to the Communist Party, because it is interpreted, or there is now some interpretation that says that this is the end of the Tripartite Alliance, or at least that it is almost a declaration of opposition against the South African Communist Party. But what one has to keep in mind that it is only half of the ANC that's affected by that, and the half that is led by President Zuma. The other half that is represented by Cyril Ramaphosa and others are very close to the Communist Party and also to COSATU. So it means that it's not, in a sense, the end of the alliance for the entire ANC, but rather it sort of plays into the factional divides that exist at the moment, and that obviously is reinforcing those divisions that will play out at the time of the National Conference in December.
Prof, Business Unity South Africa has accused President Jacob Zuma of further undermining the prospects of economic growth. We saw the rand sort of slip by 0.5% earlier today. To what extent can this uncertainty further or discourage investment?
I think one should not concentrate on single events. I think what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, especially during the crisis periods when the former Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, was still the minister, is that over time the shocks that were caused by these type of incidents became less and less, or less prolonged at least, that the markets recovered much quicker the longer it continues. And as we've seen today, for example, is that I think to a large extent that the idea of a cabinet reshuffle was already anticipated with respect to Dr. Dlamini-Zuma, as I mentioned earlier on, and therefore it wasn't that major shock, the same as, for example, in March this year. And therefore, I don't think this will have a very direct impact on the South African economy in general, on the rand in general, on the financial markets for the foreseeable future. Sometimes it responds on the moment but recovers quite quickly. And I think this is what we are seeing now again with the developments of today.
Prof, we know that the ANC NEC is meeting on Monday. What do you think is likely to take place during this meeting? Apart from their normal meetings that they do have on Mondays.
Yes, the National Working Committee is more of a managerial type of committee of the ANC. It's the executive of the management committee of the NEC, and they deal with many of the day-to-day or the week-to-week affairs of the ANC. It's not really a policy-making or decision-making body. And I think what is very important is that they have to manage now the nomination process and the build-up to the National Conference of the ANC very closely, and I think that will receive a lot of attention. I think the fact that the Secretary General of the ANC indicated that they were not well in advance consulted about this cabinet reshuffle will mean that this matter of the cabinet reshuffling is most possibly will also be addressed, and it is clear that several of the top persons in the top 6 and in the NEC will ask questions about what has happened today, and what is therefore the rationale for this reshuffling that has taken place. Over and above that, the matters of the provinces are very much on the agenda of the ANC. KwaZulu-Natal is still not resolved. The situation in the Eastern Cape is brewing. The situation in other provinces like the Western Cape and the Northern Cape also. So I think they will keep a very close watch at the development within the ANC provinces in order to make sure that it's not going to undermine or derail the preparations for the national conference.
Prof, you mentioned and you touched on the Tripartite Alliance and the effects of this cabinet reshuffle and seeing Blade Nzimande losing his post as a minister. And we've seen the SACP coming out and saying the people who are deployed in government or who are in parliament must remain in their positions. What do you think the reasoning is behind this?
I think the most important consideration is that they don't want to lose their influence in the ANC. The moment they withdraw completely, then the SACP will become very much marginalized. The influence in the internal workings of the ANC will then be lost. The way in which they sort of developed or has developed over time a constituency within the ANC and in government specifically, that they will lose that also. And I think the argument, it is much better to be inside, right in the center of government, than be outside and more easily will be marginalized or be isolated. And I think that is at this stage still the main approach of the SACP.
Prof, with today's announcement of the cabinet reshuffle, we've seen the new appointment of a new minister to the communications portfolio. Now changes there with regards to communication onto DTT. Now, do you think these will be delayed, and how will these changes affect the SABC operations? We've seen the appointment of the new board this morning as well, but going forward, do you think that the handover whether there will be some sort of delay or is there going to be immediate progression going forward?
No, it's difficult to make a judgment on this because it's not yet clear where the outgoing minister, Minister Dlodlu, stood with respect to that, and to what extent she made significant progress in the movement towards the digital system. She certainly in the beginning was much more assertive than the former minister Matumbi with respect to that, and committed herself much more openly. But I think the fact that we've seen on the same day, first of all, the cabinet reshuffle, and at the same time the appointment of the new board of the SABC, creates the possible impression that, and maybe one should say also the fact that the outgoing minister was very critical of the appointment of the new management of the SABC, the CEO, the CFO and others, and wanted to review the situation or the proposals, the nominations. The fact that she has now been removed by President Zuma from this portfolio can possibly be interpreted as if that she might have been one of the main obstacles for the development or the movement, the progress within the SABC, because the fact that on the day that she was removed, the new board of the SABC was appointed, creates that type of impression. We will have to see, to find confirmation with whether that is indeed the case. But at least at this point in time, it creates that impression. So it means at the same time that there might be some new space created with the new minister, that this will therefore also take the SABC into a new era, as well as the digital future of the SABC.
Now, Prof, just going back to earlier in our discussion where you mentioned the fact that there has been a lot of speculation with regards to a possible cabinet reshuffle taking place and the creation or the appointment of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma in a government portfolio as a minister. Why do you think this hasn't happened, or was it just speculation or just the creation of some sort of rumor to create a vibe in the political space?
Well, to be honest with you, I think this is very difficult to explain why she hasn't been included in this cabinet reshuffle, because very lately now, it was, I think last week announced that she has been now allocated to 2 portfolio committees, including the small business portfolio committee. But one expected that she will move then higher up into a ministerial position, because otherwise the question is why in any case was she moved to Parliament. To what extent will it benefit her position or the possibility for her to be elected as ANC president? At this stage, the fact that she has been left out clearly does not make sense from that logic of that point of view. I think what might be an explanation, and it's pure speculation now, is that President Zuma possibly interprets it as if it will be too much or too obvious that he is pushing her into a position as one of the favorite candidates, while there is an effort, especially from her side, to create distance between her and President Zuma, and that she is not, in a sense, in inverted commas, contaminated by the issues that surround him. Otherwise, there is no real logic why she has been excluded from this cabinet, because everyone expected that she's going to be in the position of a minister in order to be able to to level the playing field more between her and the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Now, in wrapping up, do you think there will be another cabinet reshuffle maybe later in the year or sometime next year after the ANC December elective conference?
I think it becomes much more unlikely that before December there will be another cabinet reshuffle, except if something extraordinary happens. But depending on who wins the position of ANC president, if it is someone who's not part of the Zuma group or the Zuma side of the ANC, then there is the potential for a cabinet reshuffle sometime next year. Depending on the relationship between the incoming ANC president and President Zuma still in the position of national president, because strictly speaking, that prerogative will still be with President Zuma to determine who are the members of the cabinet. But if the new incoming president, let's say for argument's sake it is Cyril Ramaphosa, if he insists that the cabinet must change because to start to implement his vision for the ANC and for government in general, then it will be exceptionally difficult for President Zuma to prevent that from happening or to refuse that. If so, it will really become a standoff between the two, and then this notion of the two centers of power will play out itself. So there is therefore certainly the potential, when we have that type of scenario, for a change in the composition of government, especially those that are very closely associated with the Gupta family, with corruption in general, or just poor performance in general. And the incoming ANC president will therefore want to demonstrate to their followers, to the ANC in general, and in view of the 2019 general election, that they personify a change and a new beginning within the ANC.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That was political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze joining us live from our Pretoria studios.